Sometimes it happens without warning. Someone is doing something ordinary, washing dishes, waiting at a traffic light, sitting in a meeting that could have been an email. And suddenly, the world shifts. They look at their hands. They have looked at their hands 10,000 times. They know them. The hands are theirs. They have always been theirs. But now, for a moment, they are not familiar. They are strange, alien, objects attached to a body that was never requested. Fingers, knuckles, skin stretched over bone, tendons that move when something in the brain tells them to move, though no one knows how the telling works or why the tendons obey. What are these? The question makes no sense. Everyone knows what hands are. This person knows what hands are. They have used them every day for decades. They have never once needed to ask. But for a moment, just a moment, they do not know. And in that moment, something much larger cracks open. The feeling has a name, though the name does not capture it. Jamevu, the opposite of déjà vu. Instead of the unfamiliar feeling familiar, the familiar becomes suddenly, inexplicably strange. A word repeated too many times loses its meaning. A face seen every day becomes the face of a stranger. A room lived in for years becomes a room never entered before. The clinical literature calls this a neurological glitch, a temporary failure of recognition. The brain, exhausted or overstimulated, briefly loses its grip on the categories it uses to organize reality. But the clinical explanation misses something. Because the feeling is not just confusion, it is not just a failure to recognize, it is recognition of a different kind. It is the sudden awareness that the categories were always artificial, that the familiarity was always a construction, that the hands were always strange. The brain just stopped noticing. The jamevu is not a malfunction. It is a glimpse behind the curtain. Most of the time, reality feels solid. A world out there. Objects in the world. A body that moves through the world. And a mind inside the body that perceives and thinks and feels. The arrangement seems obvious. The arrangement seems stable. The arrangement seems like the way things simply are. But the arrangement is not simply the way things are. The arrangement is a construction, a model, a simplified map that the brain builds because the territory is too vast, too strange, too overwhelming to process directly. The brain takes the chaos of raw sensation, light hitting the retina, pressure waves entering the ear, molecules binding to receptors in the nose, and it builds a world. It builds objects with edges. It builds categories with names. It builds a continuous self that persists through time, even though the atoms that make up the body are replaced constantly. Even though the thoughts that constitute the mind are flickering and contradictory, and nothing like a stable thing. The construction is impressive. The construction is useful. The construction allows humans to function, to survive, to make plans and remember the past and anticipate the future. But the construction is not reality. It is a story the brain tells to make reality manageable. And sometimes, in the shower, at the traffic light, staring at a pair of hands, the story falters. The story has been faltering for as long as humans have been telling stories. There are records of this experience going back thousands of years. Mystics describing the dissolution of self. Philosophers describing the collapse of certainty. Ordinary people describing moments when the world stopped making sense in a way that felt like the deepest sense of all. The experience has been called enlightenment, dissociation, psychosis, awakening, breakdown, breakthrough. The labels vary depending on the culture, the century, the interpretive framework available. But the experience itself seems constant. The categories fall away, the construction fails, and something else becomes visible. The philosopher had a word for it. He was sitting in a park in France, looking at the root of a chestnut tree. He had seen trees before. He had seen roots before. There was nothing unusual about this particular tree or this particular root. But something shifted. The root stopped being a root. The category dissolved. What remained was something he could not name. A black, knotted, raw presence that existed without justification, without explanation, without any of the comfortable labels that usually kept the world at a distance. He tried to use words to describe it. The words kept failing. Every word he reached for, root, tree, black, twisted, was already a category, already a label, already part of the construction. The thing he was seeing was before the words, behind them, underneath them. The words could not touch it. He felt nausea, not in the stomach, deeper than that. A nausea of existence itself. The realization that everything, the root, the park, his own body sitting on the bench, was simply there, for no reason, with no necessity. Absurd in the most literal sense of the word. Jean-Paul Sartre called this experience the confrontation with existence, the moment when the labels fall away and the raw fact of being becomes visible. He wrote about it in a novel called Nausea. The protagonist wanders through a city, and slowly, the ordinary world becomes unbearable. Not because anything bad happens, but because he starts to see what was always there. The sheer, unjustified, nauseating presence of things. Things that exist without permission, without reason, without any of the meaning that the human mind usually projects onto them. Most people avoid this moment. Most people never have it, or have it so briefly that it does not register. The brain is too efficient, the labels are too sticky, the construction holds. But sometimes, for some people, the construction cracks, and what they see on the other side is not comforting. The strangeness becomes more intense when the scale changes. Hands are strange enough, but hands exist on a body, and the body exists on a planet, and the planet exists in a solar system, and the solar system exists in a galaxy, and the galaxy exists in a universe that is so large, so old, so indifferent that the human mind cannot actually comprehend it, can only gesture toward it with numbers that mean nothing. 100 billion galaxies, each containing 100 billion stars, each star burning for billions of years, in a darkness that has no edge, no center, no purpose. The numbers are recited in classrooms and documentaries, spoken by narrators with calming voices, presented in ways designed to make them feel manageable, amazing, perhaps, awe-inspiring, certainly, but ultimately digestible, ultimately part of the construction. But the numbers are not digestible. Not really. The mind cannot hold 100 billion of anything. The mind cannot imagine a billion years. The mind can recite the numbers without ever actually confronting what they mean. And on one of those stars' planets, on a thin crust of rock floating on molten iron, in a sliver of atmosphere clinging to the surface by gravity alone, a species evolved that can ask what all of this is. That species is strange enough, but the strangeness is usually invisible, because the brain does not show the scale. The brain shows the commute, the email, the grocery list. brain shows the meeting that could have been an email, and the email that should not have been sent, and the text message that was misinterpreted, and the anxiety about what the misinterpretation might mean. The brain shows the small. The brain hides the large. This is not a design flaw. The brain evolved to survive, not to comprehend. The ancestors who spent their time contemplating the vastness of existence did not survive as well as the ancestors who focused on the immediate. The predator, the food source, the social hierarchy. The brain that hides the large is the brain that made it through. But the hiding has consequences. Astronauts know what happens when the scale becomes visible. They have a name for it, the overview effect. It happens when they look out the window of the spacecraft and see the Earth from outside, a blue marble floating in blackness, with no borders, no nations, no visible evidence of the 8 billion people whose entire existence is contained on that fragile sphere. The astronauts report that something shifts, not intellectually. They knew before the flight that the Earth was a planet in space. They had seen the photographs. They understood the astronomy. They had passed the tests, learned the science, memorized the facts. But seeing is different from knowing. Edgar Mitchell, who flew on Apollo 14, described it as a flash of understanding, an overwhelming awareness that the molecules in his body and in the spacecraft and in the Earth below were all made in ancient stars. That he was not separate from the universe, that he was the universe looking at itself. He called it a feeling of connectedness, not sentimental connectedness, not the kind that appears on greeting cards, a literal connectedness, a recognition that the boundaries he had always assumed were real, between himself and the spacecraft, between the Earth and space, between matter and consciousness, were constructions, labels, categories that the brain uses to make the world manageable, but that do not correspond to any actual divisions in reality. Other astronauts have called it other things. Some became more religious. Some became less. Some found it impossible to care about the things they had cared about before. The career, the status, the petty conflicts that had seemed so important when they were standing on the surface instead of floating above it. Rusty Schweikart, who flew on Apollo 9, said that he could no longer see the Earth as divided into countries. The borders were not visible from orbit. The conflicts that humans killed each other over. This piece of land versus that piece of land, this tribe versus that tribe, seemed insane from 300 kilometers up. The Earth was one thing. The divisions were imaginary. The overview effect is not jamevu exactly, but it is related. It is what happens when the construction fails at the largest scale, when the brain's carefully maintained illusion of normalcy, of Earth as solid ground, of human life as the center of something, of daily concerns as genuinely important, dissolves into the recognition of what is actually true. A rock in a void, a species that appeared moments ago in cosmic time and will disappear moments from now. A window of consciousness in an ocean of unconsciousness, brief and inexplicable and utterly without justification. The astronauts saw this. Most of them could not unsee it. The question is why anyone would want to see it. The construction exists for a reason. The labels exist for a reason. The sense of familiarity, of normalcy, of a world that makes sense and a self that persists. These are not flaws in the system. They are the system. They are what allows a human being to get out of bed in the morning, to make plans, to care about things, to function. Remove the construction, and what remains? Nausea, vertigo, the overwhelming strangeness of existence, with nothing to hold on to, nothing to push against, nothing to use as a reference point. This is why the brain rebuilds the construction as quickly as possible when it cracks. This is why the jamevu passes. This is why the astronauts eventually come home and learn to live again, as if the earth was solid and their lives were meaningful and the small things mattered. The construction is not optional. The construction is survival. But the construction has a cost. A child does not have the construction yet. To a child, everything is strange. A shadow on the wall, a dog walking past, a reflection in a mirror, the face of a parent seen for the 1,000th time, but still somehow new, still somehow not fully categorized, still somehow alive with the strangeness of existing. Watch a child encounter something ordinary, a puddle, a leaf, their own shadow moving on the ground. They do not glance and move on. They stop, they stare, they touch, taste, investigate. The puddle is not yet filed under known. The puddle is still miraculous. Children ask questions that adults have stopped asking. Why is the sky blue? Why do people die? Why is there something instead of nothing? The questions are not sophisticated. The questions do not reference Sartre or Heidegger or the overview effect, but the questions come from the same place, from a mind that has not yet learned to stop seeing, that has not yet built the construction that makes reality manageable by making it invisible. Adults call this innocence. Adults call it wonder. Adults speak of it nostalgically as something precious that is inevitably lost. But what is actually lost? Not the capacity to see. The eyes still work. The brain still processes. The information is still arriving every moment in overwhelming abundance. What is lost is the willingness to see, or rather, the brain learns to filter, to categorize, to process efficiently. The shadow on the wall becomes just a shadow. The dog becomes just a dog. The face becomes just a face, filed under known, requiring no further attention. This is called habituation, the neurological process by which repeated stimuli cease to produce a response. The first time someone hears a loud noise, they startle. The 10th time, they barely notice. The 100th time, they do not hear it at all. Habituation is efficient. Habituation allows the brain to focus on what is new, what is threatening, what requires action. Habituation is the reason humans can live next to train tracks or waterfalls or busy highways without going insane. But habituation does not discriminate. It habituates to everything, including existence itself. The process is so gradual, it is invisible. The child who marveled at shadows becomes the adolescent who barely notices them. The adolescent becomes the adult who does not see shadows at all, who walks through a world of light and dark without ever registering the strangeness of either. The world becomes furniture, background, a stage that exists only to support the drama happening on top of it. The adult moves through reality without ever seeing reality, because seeing has been replaced by categorizing, and categorizing is so much more efficient. The construction is complete, and the weirdness disappears. Not because the weirdness is gone. The universe is still strange. Existence is still unjustified. The hands are still miraculous accidents of evolution, assemblies of atoms that somehow learn to grip and gesture and type. None of that has changed. What has changed is the seeing. The brain has learned not to see. The brain has built a map and now mistakes the map for the territory. The brain moves through a world of labels, tree, root, hand, shadow, without ever touching what the labels are labeling. This is the tragedy that the philosopher identified. Not that life is strange. Life is strange. Anyone who pays attention for more than a moment can see this. The tragedy is that we get used to it. The most improbable event in the known universe, consciousness, awareness, the fact that there is something it is like to be, becomes background noise, becomes ordinary, becomes so familiar that it takes a malfunction, a jamevu, a glimpse from orbit to see it again. The child sees it. The child has no choice. The construction has not been built yet. The adult does not see it. The adult has no choice either. The construction is complete. The habituation is total. The world has become solid and normal and boring, which is to say, the world has become invisible. Sartre saw the root of the tree and felt nausea. Most people see the root of the tree and feel nothing at all. They do not see a root. They see the word root. They see the category. They see the label that their brain has attached to this particular arrangement of matter. And the label is so familiar, so automatic, so instantaneous that the thing itself, the actual root, the actual black twisted presence that exists without justification, never becomes visible at all. This is not a moral failing. This is not something to feel guilty about. The habituation is automatic. The construction is necessary. The brain does what brains do, but the cost is real. The cost is a life lived without ever fully seeing what life is. A few decades of consciousness in a universe that will exist for trillions of years, and most of those decades spent looking at labels instead of things. The question is whether the seeing is worth the nausea. The construction protects. The habituation comforts. The sense of normalcy, even if it is an illusion, allows life to continue, allows plans to be made, allows the small things to matter, even if they do not matter, even if nothing matters in the vast cold darkness where the planet spins. Remove the construction and the small things stop mattering. This sounds like freedom. Sometimes it is freedom. The astronauts who saw the Earth from outside often reported a kind of peace, a release from petty concerns, a sense of proportion, a recognition that most of what they had worried about was not worth worrying about. But the freedom has a cost, because the small things are where life happens. The meeting that could have been an email, the text message that was misinterpreted, the grocery list, the commute, the morning coffee that is too hot and then too cold and never quite right. These are not meaningful in any cosmic sense. They are not meaningful at all, probably, but they are what a human life is made of. They are the texture of being alive. They are what fills the days between birth and death, the only days there are. Remove the meaning from these things, and what remains? The strangeness, the nausea, the overwhelming, paralyzing recognition that none of this had to happen, that none of it is justified, that it simply is, for no reason, with no purpose, absurd and beautiful and terrifying all at once. A man was thrown out of an airplane at 10,000 feet, not pushed, thrown. An accident during a skydiving jump. His parachute tangled, his reserve failed, and for the 60 seconds it took to fall, he knew with absolute certainty that he was going to die. He did not die. He landed on a steep slope that absorbed the impact. He broke nearly every bone in his body, but but he survived. In the interviews afterward, he said something strange. He said that during the fall, after the panic passed, after the struggle to fix the parachute failed, there was a moment of perfect clarity, a moment when everything became vivid. The color of the sky, the texture of the air, the sensation of falling through space. A moment when all the concerns of his life, the job, the relationship, the mortgage, the argument he had that morning, became so obviously trivial that he could not believe he had ever taken them seriously. He said it was the most alive he had ever felt. He said he spent years trying to get back to that feeling. He never could. The construction rebuilt itself. The habituation returned. The vividness faded back into the ordinary. The categories reasserted themselves, and the world became furniture again. But he remembered. He knew now that the furniture was not solid, that the ordinary was not ordinary, that the vivid world he had seen during the fall was the real world, and the managed world he had returned to was the construction, the map, the simplified version that made survival possible, but made seeing impossible. This is the paradox at the center of the weirdness. The construction protects, but the construction also numbs. It makes reality manageable by making it invisible. It allows function by preventing feeling. The weirdness, the jamevu, the nausea, the glimpse from orbit, tears the construction. And through the tear, something enters. Something that is terrifying and disorienting, but also somehow more real than the ordinary managed world. The man falling knew he was going to die. And in that knowing, he finally saw what he had been looking at his entire life without seeing. This is not a recommendation. This is not a suggestion that people should seek out near-death experiences or stare at tree roots until they feel nauseous. The weirdness is not a technique. It is not a life hack. It cannot be pursued directly because the pursuing is already part of the construction, already part of the managed world that the weirdness dissolves. The moment someone tries to have the experience, they have already stepped outside the conditions that make the experience possible. The jamevu comes when it is not expected. The vividness arrives when attention is elsewhere. The construction cracks not because someone is trying to crack it, but because, for a moment, the trying stops. The weirdness comes when it comes. It comes in the shower, at the traffic light, staring at a pair of hands. It comes unbidden, unwanted, disruptive, and then it passes, and the construction reassembles, and the world becomes solid again, and the hands become just hands. But something remains. A crack, a memory. The knowledge that the solidity is not as solid as it seems, that the ordinary is not as ordinary as the brain makes it appear, that underneath the construction, behind the labels, beyond the habituation, there is something else, something that does not fit into categories, that does not make sense, that simply is. The philosopher who felt nausea looking at the tree root did not stay nauseated. He went home. He ate dinner. He slept and woke and continued his life, writing books, teaching students, having affairs, doing all the ordinary things that humans do in the brief window between birth and death. But he did not forget what he saw, and sometimes, in his writing, the nausea returns. The categories dissolve. The raw fact of existence becomes visible again, just for a moment, before the words rebuild the construction and make the world manageable once more. This is perhaps the only honest relationship with the weirdness. Not to seek it, not to flee it, but to let it come when it comes, to see what it shows, and then to return to the ordinary, knowing now that the ordinary is not as ordinary as it appears, that the hands are strange, that the body is strange, that the planet and the galaxy and the consciousness that perceives them are all strange, all improbable, all without justification or necessity. Knowing this does not change anything, and knowing this changes everything. The hands are still there. Someone is still looking at them. The moment has passed or has not passed. The jamevu has faded or is still fading or has not yet begun. Time is strange that way. It seems linear, but it is not. It seems to flow, but the flowing is part of the construction, part of the model, part of the simplified map that makes the territory manageable. The hands open and close. They have done this 10,000 times. They will do it 10,000 more, or they will not, depending on how much time remains in the window, depending on how the atoms that currently constitute the body decide to rearrange themselves, depending on factors that no one controls or understands. The hands are made of the same material as the stars that burned for billions of years to create the elements that drifted through space and coalesced into planets, the planets that cooled and developed conditions that allowed molecules to replicate, the molecules that became cells, the cells that became organisms, the organisms that eventually developed hands that can grip tools, that can touch other bodies, that can type messages and hold children and gesture at ideas that have no physical form, hands that someone is looking at right now without seeing, or seeing finally for the first time. The weirdness does not resolve. There is no conclusion that makes it make sense, no framework that contains it, no philosophy that explains it away. Sartre felt nausea and wrote about it, and the writing did not cure the nausea, only gave it a shape, a name, a place to exist that was slightly less overwhelming than the raw experience. The astronauts saw the Earth from outside and tried to describe it, and the descriptions never captured what they saw. The words are part of the construction. The words cannot reach outside the construction. They can only point, gesture, indicate that there is something there that the words cannot hold. This, too, is part of the weirdness, the impossibility of communicating it, the loneliness of having seen something that cannot be shared, that dissolves the moment language tries to capture it. Every word in this script is part of the construction. Every sentence is an attempt to point at something that the pointing obscures. The finger gestures at the moon, but the finger is not the moon. The words gesture at the weirdness, but the words are not the weirdness. The weirdness is what remains when the words stop. The weirdness is what was always there, before the words began. The hands are still there. The body is still there. On the planet, in the solar system, in the galaxy, in the universe that has no edge and no center and no purpose and no explanation. The consciousness is still there, perceiving, wondering, asking questions that have no answers. Why is there something instead of nothing? The question makes no sense. The question is the only question that matters. The question dissolves every other question and then dissolves itself, leaving nothing but the hands, the body, the planet, the void, the weirdness of being alive. Not a problem to be solved, not an insight to be integrated, just this strange, unjustified, inexplicable fact of being here, looking at a pair of hands, knowing that the looking will end someday, and not knowing when, not knowing how, not knowing if the looking means anything, or if meaning is just another part of the construction, another label, another way of hiding from the rawness of what is actually happening. The hands open, the hands close. Someone is still looking. That is all there is. That is everything there is. And it is very, very strange.